Hi, I'm Liquid Amber Girl. This is part 1 of creating a moss terrarium. To begin, we need moss, so I'm going moss hunting. Join me.
Liquid Amber Girl Gardening.
Before we begin, I want to remind you that you must ask for permission to remove mosses from any property that is not your own. Not only is it polite, it may also prevent some real trouble if you are caught trespassing on someone else's property. Also, I can almost guarantee that any place like a park, arboretum, or a reserve will have in place a serious penalty for removing any kind of plant matter, and that includes mosses. Moss hunting is super easy. You only need to take with you a bucket and possibly a weeding tool. The one I have here is one I use to remove dandelion taproots, and it's really nice for lifting the moss gently without damaging the roots, but also not taking too much soil up with it. The first moss I found on my hunting trip is this delicate fern moss, also called sheep moss. Its scientific name is Thuidium delicatulum. It looks like tiny fern fronds, and it was covering the earth, even pushing the grasses out of the way in order to grow more vigorously. I tell you all this because we can gain a great deal of information about our new moss's needs if we just observe its natural habitat carefully. The fact that this moss was widespread and pushing other plants out of the way tells me that it is a vigorous grower. Because I found it in a shady spot, I can assume that it enjoys living in the shade. And since there are huge, healthy rhododendrons growing around, I know that this soil must be acidic, and therefore this moss likes growing in acidic soil. I found that most times your hands are your best tools for lifting sheets of moss gently up off the ground. This is also a good time to remove any weeds that are growing in your moss. You don't want them popping up once you have them planted in a pretty planter in your house. I found 2 small patches of haircap moss. I used my weeding tool to gently pry up its roots because this moss has deeper roots than most mosses I have encountered. Haircap moss, also called blue moss, is great for almost any growing situation. It likes acid, alkaline, or pH neutral soil and does equally well in sun situations or shade. The scientific name for haircap moss is Polytrichum commune. One easy way to differentiate it from other mosses is its height. It grows quite tall for a moss, about 4 inches tall to be exact. And I can tell you from experience that it likes lots of moisture. On the very short trip back to my house, this moss looked like it was ready to die. All the bracts had closed down on the central branch. It looked like a bunch of green twigs. But it recovered almost instantly when I spritzed it with water. It was happy and healthy like nothing had ever been wrong. The next 2 mosses I rescued from my neighbor's driveway. Large patches of several different mosses have been sprayed with Roundup, and I'm not sure if they'll make it. I took all of it in the hopes of saving it, but I did get 2 sections that must have been missed. This first one is lipstick thyme moss. I found him on a really old pile of bricks. Lipstick moss's scientific name is Mnium hornum. This little guy was looking really rough, but once I got it into some shade and spritzed it with water, it recovered really nicely. I really love the light green color of this little moss. The second moss that I rescued was, I think, a type of fern moss, scientific name Hypnum curvifolium. At this point, that is only a guess because it is not in very good condition. This pretty little moss is growing on the roots of a pine tree. It is feather moss. The best word I can use to describe it is fluffy. Feather moss's scientific name is Hylocomi splendens. Its olive green color will make a great addition to my new moss terrarium. This last moss I found on my moss hunting adventure is called common tree apron moss. It is growing on the exposed roots at the base of a huge pine tree. The scientific name for this moss is Anomodon rostratus, and it is a deep, beautiful green. I didn't want to disturb these pretty mosses, so I just took photos that I could share with you. You may have noticed that I have hunted for mosses exclusively in the shade. This is because I want my terrariums to thrive in low light situations. If you are wanting to place your terrarium in a part sun or sunny situation, that is where you should hunt for your mosses. There are plenty of sun-loving varieties of moss. If you are unsure about what types of mosses would be appropriate for you, maybe you want to read about it a little. I use this book by Annie Martin as a reference. It is excellent if you enjoy mosses as much as I do. And now, my friends, we are done with our moss hunting adventure. Join me next week for part 2 of this series, where we will create a moss terrarium. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have an amazing week, everyone.
Liquid Amber Girl Gardening.